Hi, I'm Cassie Villela. Welcome back to my channel. Thanks for coming. If you like to learn about real estate investing, or just general home maintenance tips here in the San Antonio area, then like and subscribe. So today we're going to be talking about how you should interview a property manager. So we're going to do my top 5 questions for interviewing your property manager. I definitely recommend that you interview at least 2 or 3 property managers because you kind of can't tell what exactly you want until you talk to a few people, and then you kind of get a feel for, I liked this person because they said this, and it's just good to interview a couple. Just don't go with the first person you interview, especially if you're new and you don't know exactly what to look for. So my disclaimer I'm going to make is that I work in property management, so I might be somewhat biased, so keep that in mind. But I am going to try to address it from the point of view of a person hiring a property manager, because I actually have done that before. I did own property out of town that was managed by a property manager. So first thing we need to talk about, though, is the 2 things that affect your ROI as a rental property investor the most. So if you track these 2 things over the long term, these 2 items are what's going to determine if something is a good investment or not such a great investment. Okay, vacancy and maintenance. Those are going to be your most expensive things as a landlord to deal with. And those are also things that luckily you can control to some extent. So those are the best places to look if you're looking for ways to raise your ROI. So vacancy. Vacancy is going to happen. You're going to have tenants move out at some point, and it's rare for the tenants to move out and new tenants to move in like the very next day. You usually have to get the property cleaned in between tenants, and there's usually some kind of maintenance and repairs. I have seen properties that were rented out just basically with 1 day in between in really popular areas. But for most properties, you are going to have maybe a week to 2 weeks vacancy at the minimum when a tenant moves out. So the best way to prevent this is some of the things that we're going to talk about. Some of the questions we're going to go over are going to be how you can determine how good a property manager is at lowering the vacancy rate, at getting the unit filled quickly, and at making sure tenants stick around to begin with, so you don't have that make ready in between tenants. The other thing is going to be maintenance and repairs. So your repair cost, you're going to have repairs. The water heater is going to go out. You're going to have to replace the HVAC unit at some point. The roof is going to need to be replaced, every 25 years or so at the minimum, probably more in San Antonio because of the hailstorms. But you're going to have those expenses. So you might think, well, how can I control, that maintenance and repair costs, because I can't control the fact that things are going to break. And that's true to some extent, but you can be proactive. You can make sure that you catch things before they're a huge problem. And then you can make sure that your contractors are charging you a reasonable, appropriate rate to fix those things. So we're going to talk about some of the questions you need to ask to get the property manager's record or view on these 2 items. So my first question that I would ask is, what is your average days on market for rental listings? So this is basically from the time the tenant moves out and they list the property to the time that the new tenant moves into the property or signs a lease to start a new, a new lease term. That period is really the main driver of your vacancy rate. In San Antonio, the average rental property days on market is usually around 30 to 34 days. So that means the average for all homes rented in the San Antonio market, the average length of time it takes to find a tenant from the time the property is listed, mind you, is a month or more. So that's going to be a lot. That's a huge hit to your ROI if you're having to pay a full month of vacancy. That's basically you're paying the mortgage that month, you're paying the taxes, everything. So finding a property manager who takes that really seriously and who has a low days on market is going to save you a lot of money. So question number 2 is, what is your process for listing and showing a property? So this is going to be where I think that realtors and property managers vary the most in terms of quality and just their processes. Listing a property, finding a new tenant is the most work in property management. Even if you're self-managing, finding that new tenant is going to be where the bulk of your time and effort goes into the property. Month to month, you might have to deal with repairs or whatever, but listing it is where you're going to have to go show it, you're going to have to market it, and everybody's going to do that a little bit differently. You want to get a feel for what the property manager you're interviewing does when they list a property. So one of the things is, do they, right now, we used to be able to list a property to the MLS, which is the database, multiple listing service database that realtors use to market properties. Well, the MLS syndicates to all of the major websites where you can think of that you might go look at houses online. It syndicates to most of those. Zillow recently started charging property managers a monthly rate to put those rental listings on Zillow. So it doesn't automatically syndicate. Now you have a cost that you incur with that. So you want to make sure, though, it sucks. It's stupid. I wish I didn't have to pay it, but Zillow is where a lot of your leads come from. That's where the majority of the leads that we on our listings were coming from. So obviously that's just something we're going to have to eat. But you want to make sure that that's something that your property manager is going to do. Because I also know property managers that just list it on the MLS and then wait for another agent to bring a tenant. I can list it on the MLS and I give a commission amount for another agent who's showing their rental property tenants, clients. I can wait for an agent to show the property and get it rented that way. And that's fine, but that's going to take longer because most renters don't realize they can use a realtor to look at properties. Most of them don't even realize that's a thing. And a lot of realtors don't do it because it's a pretty low commission. So if you're waiting on that, it's going to be a longer vacancy. Whereas if you have somebody that's managing leads as they come in, the lead comes in from Zillow and then they're texted or emailed automatically and set up showings, and you're showing them really quickly and trying to find that tenant quickly, that property is going to get rented quicker. That's just an undisputable fact. And then the listing itself, if you look at different rental property listings, you can see everything. So you could see the one that was listed with 4 photos and the agent left the case on their iPhone. So there's a fuzzy line on either side. And you can see listings that are very bare. That's just, one sentence. And then you can see listings that are basically the same as if somebody was selling the house, that have full professional photographs, that have a full listing with lots of detail. Which one of those listings is going to get rented faster? Even though the market's pretty crazy and renters, rentals go fast, you are going to get a better quality tenant with the nicer listing, in my experience, because they recognize that the listing is better. I've actually had tenants that were moving in from out of state rent my property, really good tenants too, rent my property because they could tell it was a professional listing, and because I answered the phone and called them back quickly. They said, I don't even need to see the property. It's just I could tell that it's going to be good. So that really, really matters. And a lot of people, just because it's a rental, will kind of think, oh, well, I'll just stick it out there and it's not as important. But to me, it is important. It's important to present your property as well as possible online, because that's where people are looking. Then, of course, you're going to ask the screening criteria for tenants. Most property managers are going to have pretty similar screening criteria. That's why I'm suggesting actually ask detailed questions about their process to kind of get a feel for how much effort they put into that. And then, I'm putting at the bottom a warning: a low listing fee doesn't save you money if it comes with longer vacancy. So I had somebody contact me one time and she said, I'm looking for a new property manager. And so I asked why. And she said, well, every time one of my units the tenants leave one of my units, it's on the market for like 2 months and the vacancy is killing me. And I said, okay, yeah, well, I have a pretty low vacancy rate, so I think that I can fix that for you. And then we started talking, and when I told her my listing fee, my listing fee is $13.50. It's a flat rate because it's the same amount of work no matter how expensive the property is, really. So it's a flat fee, and it includes paying the other realtor, buying professional photos, advertising on social media. So there's a lot that goes into it. That's my listing fee. And she said, oh, well, my agent right now is charging me $450. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, but that's why your vacancy is a month or 2 months. Is 2 months of vacancy, what is that costing you? And so you have to, don't step over pennies, or don't step over dollars to pick up pennies. Make sure it's not going to save you money if that person is not making enough money to justify them putting in the effort of renting out the property. So question 3, how are tenants treated and how many years do most tenants stay? So the reason you want to ask this is, your vacancy rate, the drivers of that are how long it takes the property to get rented out after it's vacated, and then also how many years tenants stay. Because if they don't move at all, then you have 0 vacancy for however many years they are in the property. So you want tenants who want to stay. So the best way, to find out what that is ask an objective measure. How many years do your tenants stay in your properties? Because that is, something you can verify. It's data. I love data. So you want to make sure that the tenants are staying for several years on average. And then, here, I'll get on a little bit of a soapbox here. I'm sorry. But, the typical, like the trope right now, especially right now, is, landlords hate tenants and tenants hate landlords and everybody hates the property manager. So, it's like this very negative interaction between tenants and landlords and property managers. But I sort of hate that, because your tenants are your customers. In this business, you are providing both a good and a service. So you're providing a product, a home, and you're providing the service of maintaining that home. And that's what they're paying you for. So the tenant is not like some annoying thing you have to deal with. That is your customer. You should be working really hard to keep that customer happy. You shouldn't look at them like, oh gosh, tenants are terrible, they lie, they're going to do all these things. You need to look at that like they're the reason that your property is being paid for. They're the driver of your wealth building. So you should be thankful to them. And I know that that's going to be, I'm sure that sounds really weird coming from a property manager, but that's how I feel. I think that it's important to provide a good product and service to tenants. Now, does that mean like don't uphold the lease, or don't expect them to pay, things like that? Of course not. But it does mean when they request a repair, getting to it as quickly as possible. It means communicating with them on a regular basis. Like we send out a quarterly tenant newsletter, and it has different things in it like, hey, you know, remember to change your air filter, as in every one of them. But like if it's winter, it's, you know, here's how you take care of your pipes if we happen to have a freeze, things like that, little reminders, and even just interesting things in the community. But it's just to kind of build that relationship of, you know, hey, we want to communicate with you. We want you to feel comfortable communicating with us. We want you to be happy in your home. We want you to feel, you know, safe and happy and stay in that home for as long as possible. And so, you know, if you take care of your tenants, then they're not going to want to leave, because a lot of landlords don't take care of their tenants. So most of the time when you do, they realize that, and they're really thankful. Like, man, I've had some really bad property managers in the past, or bad landlords in the past. And so they want to stay because they know what else is out there. So be one of the good ones. Make sure, like, is there an onboarding process? How do they communicate? You know, just cover all of those bases, really get a feel for how the tenants will be treated. Okay, so now we're moving from vacancy to the repairs and maintenance side. So how are repairs and maintenance handled? First of all, is there a markup on repairs? And that's something really key to ask, because a lot of property managers have moved from, you know, charging like a 10% property management fee. They've lowered that, but then they've added on a charge anytime they have to send a contractor out. Like they add a 10, 15, 20% upcharge on that. And, you know, if you run the numbers on that, that's not saving you money. That's going to cost you more money in the long run. And then it also, you know, when you are a landlord, you're already kind of feel like punched in the gut when you have to replace the water heater, for example, or something goes really wrong. It's already painful. And so adding on that extra percentage fee when it's already painful, no, it's not my style, at least. Then how do tenants report problems? Is there, you know, an online form they have to fill out? Do they text somebody? Do they call somebody? And then what's the process for handling those? Because again, you want to treat your tenants well, and the most important way to do that is by fixing things as quickly as possible. And then another thing that property managers can do to lower maintenance and repair costs is be proactive. So, you know, if we have a hailstorm, that might mean, you know, driving around, taking a look at the roofs, calling out a roofer for any properties that look like they might have been hit. And that's gonna catch it before there's a leak, and before you have to also, you know, replace drywall and paint and all of that. Also, that yearly inspection, at least yearly inspection, if it is done by somebody who understands construction a bit, like if it's done by maybe a handyman or contractor, then they can look out for different problems. For example, this is going to be another roof-related example, but if they see that the trees are growing to where they're scraping the roof, and the trees need to be trimmed back, if you catch that before they're scraping against the roof and get them trimmed back, then they never damage the roof. But if you wait for the tenant to report it, it's not going to get reported until there's a puddle on the floor. So just making sure that those things we're thinking proactively about those things. And then you want to ask how they find handy people. I stopped using handymen because there's a lot of handy women. So handy people or contractors. Do they test them out anywhere? Are they contractors who work for them for a long period of time? Because, you know, contractors can really get in there and mess things up. And so me personally, I always test out, because I have my own properties. So I always test out new contractors on my own properties. That way, if they mess it up, at least like I didn't make a client mad. I can see that for myself and I can go in and fix it. So you want to see like what is their process for finding contractors. And then 5 is going to be, how do you communicate with owners? I would say this is a major sense of stress for a lot of people when dealing with a property manager, is not feeling like they can get a hold of their property managers. So you want to know, first of all, do owners have to approve repairs? At what level does that happen? You also want to know like who you call if you have a question, or who you email if you have a question. Are you going to have the same point of contact the whole time? Or is it a very large company where, you're calling a number and it's going to be different people every time? If it is a larger company, what is their staff turnover rate? Because if they're constantly having to hire new people, then that's when things fall through the crack, right? So you want to know, like, is it a consistent person? How is that going to work? That's really important. And I recognize this from having hired a property manager myself in another city. It is nerve-wracking, especially if you're out of state. It's nerve-wracking to not really be 100% sure what's going on with your property, and feeling like, nervous, or what's going on, or if that property manager doesn't call you back or doesn't respond to you, then that's going to make you feel even more anxious. And then here's some other tips. So those are my top 5 questions to really dig into, vacancy and maintenance. Of course, you're going to want to clarify all of the rate and fees. So there's usually a property management rate, which is a percentage of rent. Then there's usually a listing fee. There can sometimes be extra charges to, again, like I said earlier, coordinate repairs or maintenance, or do inspections. There can be a renewal fee. So if the tenants sign a new lease, just to do that. There's all kinds of different fees that there can be. So you need to be very clear on what all of those are, mainly for the purpose of making sure you're comparing apples to apples from one property manager to the next when you're interviewing. You want to look over the property management agreement carefully. There's a lot in that agreement. Some of it has to deal with if you ever end up selling the home, if you have to use them as an agent. So my property management experience was that my property manager was awesome at property management, but she was a very bad listing agent. I felt like she really dropped the ball a lot on the listing agent, or on the listing side of it, when we got ready to sell. And so if I had to do it again, I would probably say, like, I don't want to be forced to use you to sell it from the beginning. So that's something to look out for. And then just, make sure you clarify what all of the different fees are, what all of the expectations are, how things are going to work. All of that's contained in that property management agreement. Then ask for references. They should have existing owner clients that you can call and chat with. You can, of course, go on Bigger Pockets and make a forum post. You can, look online and see if they have ratings, reviews. You just want to get, well, I will say the caveat to the ratings and reviews is you may have like angry tenants that leave reviews. And, those can be important because, like I said, how you treat your tenants is very important. But then you can also have tenants that, had to get evicted and leave nasty reviews. So you want to make sure you read them and get a feel for, okay, is this a legitimately bad situation, or is this just a person who's trying to do some harm? Know what you're looking for ahead of time. So this might be difficult if it's your first time, if you're a new investor. That's why I recommend interviewing at least 2 or 3 different property managers, so you kind of get an idea of how they vary and what you like and what you dislike. But you want to kind of, get some things clear. Do you want a big company that has, standard processes and, has a lower fee, but you're going to be one of thousands of properties that they manage? Or do you want a smaller property management company that's going to give you more individual attention, but is going to have a little bit higher fee? Or anywhere in between? What's important to you? What, and that's going to vary. Maybe when you're a new investor, something like that matters more. And then when you're experienced, you say like, oh, I don't need hand holding. It's fine. Just get the lowest rate. So it can change over time. It could change depending on the property. So just make sure that you get a handle on that, think about it before you're interviewing. That way you can kind of have your expectations set and know when somebody meets those expectations. I would definitely love to hear any other recommendations you guys have in the comments, any other questions you guys might ask your property manager as you're interviewing. Definitely leave feedback. Do any of my questions suck? Do you think that they could be better? Do you think I left out something really, really important? Yeah, let me know in the comments. If you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.